Greetings and welcome back to Inspired Messages. In today's segment, we are going to be breaking down a couple more terms as we unveil our illusions. We must unlearn what we have been taught. We must learn again so that we uplift ourselves and become the powerful, magical, intelligent beings that we are. Because all of the misinformation that we've been given has provided us with the camouflage where we are hiding behind these, how would I say, mask of who we are not. And so the time has come. We are living in a time where many people are awakening. Many people are, their eyes are becoming open to the reality. And so this is why these segments that are entitled Unveil, we are bringing information to help clarify these terms that we have been given so deceptively, so that we are again living the lies, living in the illusion of what is not. So in today's segment, we're going to be breaking down, we're going to unveil, let me utilize the word unveil, a couple of terms. We're going to unveil a couple of terms. So as I read through, of course, we're going to be utilizing the dictionaries, the Dictionary of All Scriptures and Myth. And of course, we know myth is not what we were taught, as if something that is how would I say, a false belief or idea. That is not what a myth is. In actuality, a myth is the symbolism of divine emanation from the absolute and manifestation of spirit and matter in time and space throughout the cycles of life. And that is what a myth is. So let us dive into the words that we're going to be unveiling today as I read through the text regarding Genesis and the creation. And so we're going to be unveiling the tree of life, the word death, paradise, and the fall of man. So let's dive in. So we know for thousands of years, human beings have tried to understand the world and how it all began. And so the explanations that we often are often given to us in the form of myth. And of course, we know the myth is, when they explain it to us as a myth, our minds, the first thing we believe is that it is untrue. But the myth is actually sacred scriptures of symbolic accounts. And so when we look in the book of Genesis, we know the story of creation, where on the sixth day, God made man and woman and put them in the midst of all kinds of animals and plants in a garden called Eden. And in this garden, there were two trees. And there was the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. But they don't talk about the tree of life often. But they talk about the tree of knowledge of good and evil, because that is the tree that God forbade Adam and Eve to eat the fruits of. And they were told in the story that as long as they obeyed him, they would live happily in the midst of abundance. But then, of course, we know how the story goes. The serpent comes, and the serpent persuades Eve to eat of the apple, and then Eve persuades Adam, and so they are living into sin. But what they don't tell you is that when you begin to dissect and unveil these terms from a metaphysical standpoint, you get a totally different comprehension of what the text actually means. And so Christianity teaches you from a literal standpoint, whereas these terms are from a metaphysical standpoint. We're not going to dive too much into this, but pay attention as we're revealing the metaphysical meaning of these terms in the Bible. And Facebook is now changing its name to Meta. And so that's just food for thought, and go do your research about that. And so you can come back and leave your comments in the comment section below, because I would love to hear from you. What is it that you find? And so let us continue. So we know that Adam and Eve were driven out of paradise. So what in the world does paradise mean from a metaphysical standpoint? Let's look at the word let's look at the word paradise. When you come to the dictionary, it tells you that the word paradise is a symbol of a state of blissful consciousness on either the higher mental plane or the Buddhic plane. And we all know Buddhic is that higher consciousness, the light, that's your enlightened self, in which the soul is suffused in wisdom, truth, and love, and entirely free from the lower nature. And that is the symbology or the metaphysical meaning of the word paradise. Now we're going to read an excerpt from the book. There's a book called The Tree of the Knowledge of Good and Evil. And it is written by, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this name correctly, but it's called Avinohav O. Mikhail. And we're going to read this excerpt, and it says, hold on, give me 1 second. It says, as you know, when Adam and Eve lived in paradise, they were allowed to eat the fruit of all the trees in the garden with one exception, that of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. But what you do not know is that the fruit of this tree is the symbol of all the forces that the first man and woman were still incapable of controlling, transforming, and using. And this is why God told them, the time will come when you will be able, or when you will be allowed to eat this fruit. But at the moment, you are still too weak. And if you eat it, the forces it contains will kill you and you will die. And so in the text, it says the words, you will die, we should understand to mean your state of consciousness that will be changed, not a physical death, but the death of your consciousness. And this changed state of consciousness is indicated in Genesis, but it has not always been understood from this standpoint. And it says, Genesis says that when Adam and Eve were living happily in paradise, they were both naked and were not ashamed. Later, after eating the forbidden fruit, the eyes of both were opened, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves aprons. This sudden awareness of their nakedness shows that there had been a change within them. The tree of life represents the unity of life. Life as it is before it is polarized, before there is either good or evil. The tree of life is a realm that transcends good and evil. So now let's look at the metaphysical meaning of tree and evil, although it's been explained here. But when you go to the dictionary and it says the tree of life says a symbol of the divine life which spreads through the universe and soul and produces all forms and activities on the planes of manifestation. So the definition is consistent to the text. So let's go back to the text now and continue. It says, the tree of life is a realm that transcends good and evil. The tree of knowledge, on the other hand, represents the world of polarization, a realm in which we are subject to the alternation of day and night, joy and sorrow, and so on. And so now let's look at the metaphysical definition of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And it says in the Metaphysical Dictionary, a symbol of the reflex spiritual life growing upward through all the ramifications of experience on the lower planes and bearing the fruit of experience, the evolving moral nature. By the eating of it, man came to know experimentally the vast difference between good and evil. And that's the definition of the tree of good and evil. So now let's go back to continue reading through the text. It says, the tree of life is a realm that transcends good and evil. The tree of knowledge, on the other hand, represents the world of polarization, a realm in which we are subject to the alternation of day and night, joy and sorrow, and so on. These two trees, therefore, are not simply phenomenon of the vegetable kingdom. They are realms of the universe or states of mind. God forbade Adam and Eve to eat the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil because he did not want them to enter the realm of polarization. And so why was this prohibited? Why is it simply, was it simply useless? No, because why would God create anything useless? And so a tree that produces fruit that no one could eat or make use of in any way would be contrary to divine wisdom, because divine wisdom never creates something useless, never creates something unless it is useful. So now let's continue with the text. There were beings who were capable of eating the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil without harm to themselves, but Adam and Eve were not yet ready to do so. The contact with these astringent forces contained in the fruit would have caused the subtle matter of their bodies to congeal and solidify. And in fact, this is exactly what happened. Tradition speaks of a fall, and the word fall symbolizes their passage from a subtle state of matter to a state that was more opaque. After eating the forbidden fruit, Adam and Eve were more densely material, and it is this materialization that is expressed in the words, they knew that they were naked. So before their act of disobedience, they were already naked, but they were clothed. They were clothed in light. And afterwards, they saw that they had lost their robes of light, and they suddenly felt ashamed and tried to hide. And so when you look at the metaphysical meaning of the fall of man, hold on one second. The metaphysical meaning means a symbol of the descent of the evolving soul or consciousness from higher to lower planes due to the mind and emotions being attracted by the desires and sensations of phenomenal existence. Through the fall, man exchanges a blissful state of passive receptivity for a condition of active responsibility, becoming thereby a moral being, knowing higher and lower, and involved in a struggle between good and evil, during which the potential qualities within him are evolved into actuality. And there it is clear, after eating the forbidden fruit, Adam and Eve continued to live physically, but they died to their higher state of consciousness. And so they were driven out of paradise. And again, paradise is the symbol of higher consciousness. And so they were driven out of paradise on this earth. And when we look again, let's go back and continue reading the text. It says, the paradise from which they were banished was an earthly paradise. That was an earthly paradise, And what was the difference then between the earth on which they already lived and that to which they were banished? According to initiatic science, the earth has an etheric double which surrounds it like a luminous atmosphere. It is this subtle etheric double that is the true earth spoken of in Genesis. The earth as it was when it came from the hands of God. The true earth is not the solid, condensed ground on which we live. The true earth is the etheric earth. It was on this earth, which we call paradise, that God placed the first human beings. It was there that they lived in the radiant luminous bodies that we spoke of earlier, and they knew neither suffering nor sickness nor death. And so we must unveil. We have to unveil. We need to gain the comprehension, the understanding, the overstanding of these metaphysical terms. And we have to realize that paradise still exists. Although we cannot see it, it is all around us as material reality, but a reality that exists on the subtle etheric plane of matter. And so we must raise our consciousness. We must unveil ourselves in order to see that paradise exists, and the tree of eternal life still stands in the paradise and still produces the elements that constituted the nourishment of our first parents, our ancestors. And to continue with the text, they lived in and were nourished by this etheric substance of the earth. It was this substance that gave light and purity to their lives. And of course, the tree of life was not actually a tree, but a current that flowed through the region from the sun. And so Adam and Eve were nourished by the sun's rays, for the tree of life is the sun. We must wake up. We must unveil. We must raise our consciousness. It is the time. The time is now. I hope this message reaches you well. And please leave your comments below. I would love to hear from you. And until next time, one love.